So I'd like now to introduce Jaap Scholten. In the context of this conference, Jaap is most well known for his splendid book, Comrade Baron, on the fate of the Hungarian aristocracy in communist Romania in Transylvania. Stalin's famous remark, one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic, is in my view completely undermined by this splendid book, because every statistic in that book is a tragedy, and we learn about the tragedy and what it's like for the people and their families when they suffer such a thing. So your fate, incidentally, on this occasion is for me to ask you to go straight into your talk and the audience to read more about you in the program. Thank you,
Good.
Jaap.
Thank you, John. I will read the three parts from the book, and we'll tell a little bit in between. It will take, I think, 15 minutes. The book was written for my three sons, and the motto of the book is by the courageous Romanian writer Ana Blandiana: memory must be a road not only to the past but also to the future. I think so. The subject it's about the Hungarian aristocracy in Transylvania, in Romania, and it is very much about loyalty within these families. But I think when we come to the subject of today, that loyalty is also very important. Because I think when your father or your grandfather was a big communist, you will be loyal to him. You will try to protect him. And for Romania, I did do the simple calculation. When you see the party members and the Securitate, and you look how many children and grandchildren they have, you have like 1 million people who passionately want to protect them and protect what they did. And I think that is one of the things that we see in Romania, but in all the satellite states and in Russia, that there is a strong opposition against the memory of what communism did. And I think this is, for that reason, I think there are so few memorials and places of remembrance for the victims of communism. What I, as a complete outsider, because I'm a Dutchman, I grew up in the Netherlands in complete peace. I was never in this. But I think it's a huge injustice. My Hungarian is really bad, so I have to do this whole thing in English. And my children always remind me that I speak English like I'm from Kazakhstan, but I think with the subject of today, that is quite appropriate. I would like to, before I read these three parts, I would like to return to the two first speakers of today, the excellent speakers of today, Charles Crawford and David Price Jones. I liked very much the part about the bananas as the lack of bananas and the promise of bananas and the lies about bananas in the Soviet Union, where Charles was referring to. Because for my story, well, as all the Hungarians here know, László Tökös, the pastor from Timișoara, was very important in the uprising against Ceausescu. And on the 16th of December they wanted to throw him out of his house. And then the Hungarian minority in Timișoara surrounded the house of László Tőkés. And then many Romanians came also to help to protect the house and protect László Tőkés. And well, then many people were killed actually in Timișoara, and Ceausescu had 2 days later, he had to go to Iran. He had to do, I think, a big deal about oil. So he went there. But before he stepped in the airplane, he said to the Romanian people in a television interview that there would be growing bananas on the trees in Romania than that anything of the government would change. So Ceausescu would stay in place. And then students in Timișoara were able, because Timișoara is a very multicultural city within Romania, they were able to smuggle out of Serbia bananas. And the night after that, with pieces of iron, they hang in Timișoara in the cold winter of December 1989. They hang bananas in the trees in Timișoara. And I thought this is such a brilliant way, and it is exactly illustrating what Charles Crawford was saying, that human creativity will always triumph over such a dictatorship and awful system. Then David Price Jones, you wrote a beautiful review on this book, my book, with the title Elegy for Elegance. And I looked up what elegance means, what are the synonyms for elegance. And this is what I found: charm, culture, grace, gentility, noblesse, politeness, purity, restraint, style, taste. Well, to me, that is quite much the essence of humanity. And so I hope my book is not a funeral song to all this, and in some way this will triumph over all. Thank you for writing this great review. In Bucharest, in Romania there are, well, here in Budapest we have the House of Terror, but in Romania there are exactly two places of memorial for the victims of communism, although there are 200,000 people who were killed, executed, or tortured to death by the communists, and about 600,000 people who, well, were kept in the Gulag or in prisons or in Securitate places or in psychiatric institutes. But there's one in Sziget, there's a former prison, that's a place of memory. And there's a very small one in Bucharest, in the Strada Luis Calderon. And there on the wall is written, "The greatest victory of communism, a victory dramatically revealed only after 1989, was to create people without a memory, a brainwashed new man unable to remember what he was, what he had, or what he did before communism." And that indeed, I think, is a great tragedy. This book I focused completely on what happened to the Hungarian aristocracy in Transylvania, how they lived before communism, what happened to them during communism, and how, after the fall of communism, some people try to rebuild a life in a moral emptiness. What happened to this group of people? They were all deported in one night on the 3rd of March, 1949. They were taken by armed militia and Securitate in groups. They came to the houses and they were thrown in trucks and they were sent to 6 cities. And they had to stay and live in these cities for 16 years. They were never allowed to leave the city borders. And they were mostly living in basements and had to do hard labor. And I interviewed as many as people possible who still were alive, and their children and their grandchildren. And so it are very personal stories. But one woman that and that is the first part I want to read. One woman, in some way, she escaped first this deportation, and she could still continue to live. And I visited her in Marerswasserhei in her flat. And Emma received me, wait, I have to take off my glasses. Emma received me in her flat earlier in the day with tea and a dish of biscuits and Smarties. Next to the dish lay the expropriation documents from 1949, photograph albums, and her Carnet de Munca, a record of employment, an item of inferior quality, made of rough paper bound into a hardcover. That workbook contained a list of exactly where you had worked and what you had done, with stamps from the relevant authorities. It also gave your parents' names, which was how class enemies were excluded from every job other than simple manual labor. The terror of this book, she said, lifting it into the air. She was keen to show me documentation of what had happened to her. You mustn't write only about the big, dramatic things. It's important to write about the little things, everyday things, if you want people to understand life under a regime like that. Emma whispers. There's a famous poem by Julia Ilyes. Hol tsarnokzak van, ot tsarnokzak van, mindenki tsem a láncsban. Where there is oppression, everything is oppression, and everyone is a link in the chain. Well, and very contrary to the words of Emma, I like to read now a little longer piece that is very much about the gulag, about the prisons, about the repression of the communist system. Because for me, as a Dutchman who completely grew up in peace and away from all this horror, it was very difficult to get close to what people lived through here in Hungary and in Romania and in Poland, and to get a feeling what that means to live in such a system. So I went to Gerla, to the prison there, and I went to the Danube Black Sea channel to where all the camps were. And I will read this part. It is like 2 pages. So, Gerla was one of the 3 Romanian institutions, along with Aiud and Camp Peninsula on the Danube Black Sea Canal, where the re-education program developed in Pitești in 1949 and 1950 was implemented. It started in Gerla in the autumn of 1951 and went on until August 1952. In a special wing, prisoners were tortured by fellow prisoners for days, sometimes weeks, on end until they forswore who they were and a new man was born. The brainwashing happened in 4 stages. You were shut in a cell with a fellow prisoner who, after you had got to know him and felt you trusted each other, became your tyrant. Pressured by means of humiliation and torture, in a process known as unmasking, the prisoner had to distance himself from everything that was dear to him. The final step that brought re-education to a successful conclusion consisted of making the victim torture a fellow prisoner, preferable his best friend. Students and priests were the groups seen as most in need of re-education. The program was based on the ideas of Soviet sociologist, I cannot say that word, and educationalist Anton Marenko, and developed by Ludovic Zeller from Oradea and Boris Grunberg from Tiraspol. The subject must be made to understand that he was a déclassé and that his only hope of salvation lay in gaining the support of the party, which he could do only by bringing fellow failures to the path of truth by means of re-education. The goal was to destroy the personalities of opponents of the regime. Alexandru Nikolsky, deputy director of the Securitate, was responsible for implementing the system, which was first used on 6th of December 1949 in Pitești, where a group of prisoners trained in re-education methods provoked an argument with their cellmates. The guards intervened and took the cellmates to the courtyard, where they had to undress and lie flat on the ground. For half an hour, the guards hit the prisoners with iron bars before turning them over to Turnăcanu, the leader of the re-education group. The Romanian leadership terminated the program in 1952, probably because of concerns about bad publicity abroad, or as the result of an internal power struggle. 22 of the prisoners involved in the re-education program were executed. None of the inventors of the program were tried. Part of the reason no one speaks about re-education is that the only possible way of surviving it was to torture fellow prisoners. I haven't met any of those who went through it. I did, though, have a phone passed to me one summer afternoon when I was sitting with friends in a garden in Marosvásárhely eating lunch. It was a Transylvanian who had survived re-education when he was a student. He couldn't meet me, but he had written a book. Freely translated, its title was, If you have survived, then you keep your trap shut. In its grotesque sadism, the Romanian re-education program demonstrates the essence of communism. The insistence on submission to the party, the creation of a new man by violence, the destruction of the individual, the deep-seated hatred of all independent thinkers, strikingly, and this actually sums up communism, the new man was defined by his preparedness to become a tyrant himself. A system that produces such a program is one of unlimited terror. Okay, the last. How many minutes did I already talk, John?
I think you have 2 minutes left.
2 minutes left. Yeah, I have, the last quote is of two very different people. One is Pista Palfi, a friend of the famous Palfi family, deliverer of generals for centuries long. And the other is of Gaspar Miklós Tamás, left-wing intellectual. I hate the Hungarian elites, says Gaspar Miklós Tamás, professor at the Central European University in Budapest and one of Hungary's leading left-wing intellectuals. And I have to say that I interviewed him when still was the other government. It was the socialists were in government. I hate them all. But in the times of the aristocrats, there were at least people with sense of decorum who knew how to behave. Now it's many times worse. Today we have an elite that doesn't even pretend to want to do anything good for the country. It's naked egotism now and shameless craft. And Pista Palfi wrote to me, the worst thing about 50 years of communism isn't the sweeping away of the aristocracy. The worst thing is the wiping out of the old civil society, of all the people and classes with a long tradition of honest work. Service, independence of mind, merchants, farmers, entrepreneurs, academics, professionals. In their place, we have generations filled with cynicism and an attitude of what the hell, we're just doing what we can to survive. Most are detached from any consciousness of history and tradition and they tend towards idiotic forms of a political extremism. They know nothing about the underlying concept of a civil society familiar to happier Western countries. That is the great tragedy here. Thank you.
Jaap, thank you very much indeed. That was powerful. And the account of the re-education program, in a sense, underscores the terrible oddity that there are countries, rather like the France just described by Anne Elizabeth, but other countries as well, in which there is the response to these kind of crimes is to look away and do as little as possible about them. And this is something which I hope is beginning to change and will change as a result of this anniversary.